All right, guys, in a few minutes we'll do a full walk around, but I think before we get into that and I start boring everybody, let's do a little rip around the yard so you can see how this thing sounds. 2021 YXZ base model manual. It rips. It's the quickest side-by-side I've ever had. As far as, you know, getting from point A to point B on a trail, maybe not in a straight line, but it is fast. It handles awesome, very, you know, centralized, short wheelbase, good steering, excellent turning radius. It smokes the Talon in a lot of ways. So we're gonna tell you the things I like about this thing real quick. I like the Fox 2.5s with the fully adjustable suspension, right? High and low speed compression, rebound adjustment, preload, crossover adjustment, fully adjustable shocks. Love that. I really like the fact that it's got that front and rear, right? I like the engine. It revs really good. It's got good torque through a lot of the rev range. Good exhaust sound. It's not super loud, but it sounds great. That 3-cylinder screams. I love that the radiator's mounted in the back. That's super cool. Really good cooling. It's not going to get full of mud in the front, and it keeps the heat going back this way, away from the rest of the engine and away from the occupants. I like that the air intake's in the center. I like how it's shielded. I like the driving position a lot. I like the nice rubber steering wheel. Way better than the Talon, right? Super squishy rubber, very compliant. No little holes in the back to get your fingers stuck in. Like that a lot. Love that it's got a manual shifter. You're actually shifting gears with the linkage. There's no electronics involved. You're in a lot of control. Really good dash, tachometer, all that stuff. I like that it revs to the moon. That's super cool. Really comfortable. Okay, now things I don't like. This is where all the Yamaha guys get mad. The roll cage looks like shit. Really small pipe, pretty dinky. I hate how Yamaha does this. It looks like my Wolverine 850. That is the lazy and most mechanically just dull and ugly way to mount a roll cage pipe together. That is just a really just simple and lazy way to join a pipe together. It looks like crap. Hate that. Hate how they do it here. It just slips over with one bolt. You can kind of see the thickness of the cage there. It's not amazing. And the cage is in a lot of different pieces, right? So this is all one piece, but all these pieces in the center all bolt on. So you have a lot of wiggle room points right here. You roll this thing once, I guarantee the cage is gonna get very out of whack. I think I like the Talon cage better. People talk crap about both the cages. I think the Talon's is actually a little better. Don't like that at all. I don't like the clutch setup. Now that's the common complaint on these things is the clutching and the gearing, right? People burn clutches in them. That's probably the #1 major failure with these things. It's not so much that it's a clutch or that it's geared high. It's that the clutch pedal doesn't have a whole lot of feel. So in flip-flops, you can kind of feel the engagement, but in boots, forget about it. There's not enough feel there, and the engagement zone is too short. Also, the engine's pretty peaky. So at low RPMs, say below 5,000, it doesn't like living there. It likes to live above 5,000 RPMs. So if you're trying to take off nice and controlled and not break traction, like loading on a trailer with ramps, you don't want to kick the ramps out, or you're trying to do some technical stuff on some rocks, the setup is terrible. So this thing is absolute garbage for low speed riding. This is 2019 gearing, 2021. So it's got the lower gears in first, which is great. Makes it a lot better. Once you're in first gear and you're cruising, you can go up any hill at a decent rate of speed. But if you have to come to a complete stop on the hill, someone stops in front of you, you got to get going again. Real challenging to make a smooth takeoff on this thing. Obviously, I've only put 50 miles on it. I'll get better at that. But right now, it's tricky. Hopefully it breaks in some. But once you're moving, as you just saw, you can bang through the gears. Upshift, downshifts are very quick, and they're fine. So that's all good. But I don't like the clutch engagement, don't like the clutch feel, and I don't like that it doesn't have low range, or at least a 6-speed. A 6-speed with a super granny would help a lot. It's got a 5-speed in it with the first gear being granny, so your first and second gear jump is a huge change in ratio. Don't like that. I don't love the front diff. The front diff is really tiny, right? I mean, my hand up here for scale. It's a tiny differential for a side-by-side. This axle is a tiny axle for a side-by-side. It's smaller than my thumb. The back axles aren't huge either, but the front end is really tiny. You get the feeling that the front of this thing is just thrown in there to give you four-wheel drive when you need it, but it's really a rear-wheel drive vehicle, right? Which is fine. That's how I'm going to use it. I like that it's got a front locker. I did test that a little bit. It's got a real electric locker, unlike the Talon. You know, it actually slides a collar over and boom, locks down one of the spider gears or one of the side gears. But people do break the diffs. Apparently they only have a 2 spider gear differential. You can upgrade to a 4. It's expensive, but that apparently fixes the diff problem. So that's another thing I don't like. And that's it for things I don't like. The suspension's awesome. I think the suspension's better than the Talon. It doesn't have the goofy, weird 5-link or 3-link suspension. It's really just one control arm here and one big control arm at the bottom, but it still gets good travel. It's very planted. Really big sway bar that you can trust. It doesn't have the crazy body roll the Talon has. So it's a lot more sporty feeling and a lot more hardcore. So when Yamaha says it's a pure sport side-by-side, they mean it. This is the most un-user-friendly side-by-side ever. If you haven't had a side-by-side, you want your first one, don't buy this. This thing's hardcore. It's fast. It's like it honestly feels like a race car or a little shifter cart out of the box. I mean, it is quick and it wants to be driven fast. Yeah, you can putt around on it, but it's a lot happier when you're hauling ass. And it works great when you're hauling ass. The suspension's awesome. Jumping, it does lawn dart with the stock suspension settings, pretty bad. Probably not as bad as the Talon, but it's pretty bad. But yeah, so overall, like most of it, I like that the engine's back here, kind of far forward, you know, almost in front of the wheel, and then the transmission's way up in there, so it gets good weight distribution and it makes it feel real sporty. They keep a lot of the weight centralized, right? Passengers are here, batteries here, transmission's here, engine's right here. A lot of the weight's right in the center of it, and that makes this thing really want to turn very good, and the turning radius is awesome. So all that's great. I just got to get really good at the clutch and hopefully not to burn too many clutches. They do make lower gears for it. I'll definitely do that eventually. As far as mudding and rock crawling and technical stuff, this is the wrong side-by-side. This is for wide open trails, dunes, etc. So the obvious question is, Mud Puppy, why did you buy it? You go in the mud. Well, Holopaw, if you've ever been out there, it's actually 95% wide open sandy trails with some mud here and there and some deep water here and there. This will be better in most of Holopaw than most other side-by-sides. And it'll be way more fun because I'm shifting gears and I got a clutch and I got control of some extra variables that I can manipulate to make this thing more fun and faster and scare the crap out of my passengers. Is a Talon a better side-by-side? Yeah, it is. Overall, the Talon's gonna go more places. It's gonna get you there easier. In some situations, the suspension might be a little more comfortable. The suspension is still better and faster and more tunable. But the Talon, having low range, having an automatic mode where you can drive with one hand if you want to, is great. This thing, you'll never drive it with one hand, right? You gotta be grabbing gears constantly. So this is not a beer drinking side-by-side. This is a sports side-by-side. A lot of the hate for this thing comes from the fact that everyone thinks all side-by-sides are just to sit in and drink beer. I bet a lot of people buy this thing, immediately turn around, take it back to the dealership and trade it in because it's too hardcore for them. It is very hardcore. I had a really hard time finding a 2021 manual shift, meaning 3 pedals. A lot of dealerships I called said, oh yeah, we have a manual shift. I go look at it, it's got paddles, it's sport shift. That's not manual shifter, dude. So this 3 pedal, I had to go all the way to northern North Carolina to find this thing. And don't recommend buying stuff in North Carolina. It's a pain in the butt. The way that their tag works and their tax and everything, way less convenient than Tennessee, where I usually buy stuff. But again, that's the first one I could find. The only one I could find really, other than Pennsylvania. So I went and got it. But I got what I wanted. It's cool. I'm really impressed with the power. It feels faster than I thought it was going to. It's got a similar horsepower rating to the Talon, but you know, maybe it's a little lighter or what, but it feels really quick. The engine sounds great. It revs quick. It feels a lot more hardcore. The Talon had a lot of body roll. I didn't like that. I didn't like how it bucked. It didn't have enough rebound dampening. This does, and I can tune it all. So for me, someone with a decent amount of experience in side-by-sides, it's probably more fun than the Talon for high-speed stuff, but it's going to be very annoying and frustrating for low-speed stuff. So I'll have to get something else for that. Maybe a P500. I don't know. Something slow and low-geared. But I'm going to give you some observations I have, just poking around this thing, let you see some different angles of it, and tell me what you guys think, tell me what you guys want to see. Obviously, we're going to have some snorkeling videos coming up, suspension videos, how I'm tuning it. It came tuned from the box way wrong. Settings were way wrong. Dealership didn't PDI it right. Tires had 25 PSI in them. Shocks were set different left to right, front to back. It was all jacked up. So we got all that straightened out, and now it rides a lot better. But yeah, let me know in the comments what you guys want to see with this thing, and yeah, we'll just go from there. It's another thing that's nice about it. There's no radiator in the front. So it slopes down. So from the driver's seat, it's a very open view. You can see the road and the trail very well. Visibility is probably about as good as it gets on this thing. That is excellent. Okay, and then the next thing down is this big scoop right here. So you're probably wondering what that is. That's your major air intake for your radiator, because the radiator's in the back. One of my favorite things about it, it rejects the heat rearward, which is super cool. So you can pull that off very easily, just 2 little clips set on top of the tire. Huge radiator back here, like the biggest radiator I've ever seen in a side-by-side. If you come down this side, you see that there's 2, can't see it on this side, there it is. 2 giant fans, one here and one on the other side. Those fans are really powerful and very noisy when they kick in. First thing that happened, I was like, what is that noise? This thing falling apart? Nope, it's just the fan. So that's really cool. The next thing would be the seats. So the seats are pretty comfortable. They're not like a super bucket. They do have some side support, but I did feel myself kind of going side to side a lot in them. This seat slides forward and backwards. Both the bottoms come out, just like most side-by-sides, you just pull them out. There's your little toolkit. As you can see, it's very dusty, but I do like the foam and everything. I feel it's going to clean up nice. Overall, I really like the seats. Up here, you've got a little access port, and you have to kind of pop it back, and you can get to your radiator. There's your oil tank. There's your vent for your fan. There's your intake manifold right there, the plenum kind of deal. All very accessible. Same thing on this side. We've just got a couple different things in here. So this is just a walk around, guys. So if you have any questions, I'll put it in the next video. There's your coolant overflow. It looks like I've got it at the right level. A nice little sight window here for it. And then there's your radiator vent, your coolant overflow vent, and then again, the top of your radiator, all very nice. Now what you see right there, that's the air box. And to get it out, you just turn that and it comes right out. That's pretty cool. So we'll get to the air intake system in a minute, which obviously is interest to me because of, mudding and snorkeling reasons. Okay, next thing down, we'll get into here. So this right here is a plastic cover that you think might be storage for like your phones or whatever, not in this vehicle. It's actually kind of annoying because it pops up really easy. See how this just popped up? And it did that a lot on the trails and it started bouncing around. So I got to find a way to secure that better. It works by just snapping into these 2 things. So you need to tighten those up somehow. But this hole right here is pretty cool. So this is your intake for your engine. And it is dusty in here, right? So you can see that it's not like it's breathing the cleanest air in the world. Some dust did make it in here, but it was a very, very dusty day. So the air intake, some of the air flows through this slot right here, out of these holes, into this space and into here. But a lot of the air comes from under here and under here and under here, which would usually be a problem because you'd have radiator heat, but there's no radiator up here. So the tunnel in this thing stays pretty cool. The only air flowing through there is going over the transmission. So it's breathing pretty cool air. It's up high. It's definitely well shielded from moisture, which is great. And it'll probably be pretty easy to snorkel. It's kind of a weird shape. I know a lot of people take a hole saw and just cut a big hole in the airbox and then come up right here. I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to do it yet, but something like that. You've got your relays here, your fuses, big old battery, very centrally located. Then there's your ECU and more relays. So that's great. In the driver's seat, you got your shifter. So it's a sequential box. So up and down shift, that's all it does. Your clutch pedal down here, parking brake, 2, 4 and diff lock, which works great. Headlights. This screen's really good. A nice big tachometer. This white light flashes when you need a shift right at the red line. Obviously I haven't done that yet. I haven't had it over 9,000 RPMs because it's in break-in. But you got temperature, you got your trips, your fuel. That's how much fuel it burnt in 40 miles at Adventure World. I think this thing's pretty darn efficient. I don't know how accurate that gauge is yet. Big storage box here that's really, really heavy duty because it's designed to mount some electronics, I assume. So I'm probably trying to find a way to fit a waterproof storage box in that. Glove box, pretty decent sized glove box. Handbrake's really cool. I was actually using that a lot to slide the back end around. We'll get to that in a second. But yeah, from sitting in here, the view's really open and very nice. The front diff is microscopic for a side-by-side. You can see it right there. Put my hand up to it. I mean, it's a pretty tiny diff. These axles, about the size of your thumb, also very tiny for a side-by-side. The cups are very tiny. It all looks very ATV size. Now, I know they work pretty good. The transmission has a slipper clutch type thing for the front end, so if it gets overloaded, it'll actually almost slip this ratchet inside the transmission, which is great. But it all looks really tiny. Bushings are all greasable, which means they're not like the lifetime, or not lifetime, but the maintenance-free bushings on the Talon. But it's nice that they have grease zerks. It's just another thing to maintenance. This front sway bar is extremely tiny, and there's weird angles on it where the links are. So I don't know if this does anything. I'm gonna probably take it on and off and see if it does anything. If it doesn't, I'm gonna leave it off. It's just one more thing to squeak and pop and wear once these bushings start going bad. But pretty tiny sway bar. I think that's kind of a joke just to appease someone who's like, it needs a sway bar for safety. There's a good view of the steering. Again, everything on this thing's very open and very laid out. It's even more open than the Talon, which I love. But big empty tunnel down here, big scoop to keep air flowing over the transmission. There's your front diff vent line. Of course, true dual rate shocks with crossover adjustment. That's great. Just telling you things I'm observing here. Okay, that's about it for up here. The plastics are a little flimsy and thin. They're, you know, not super premium feeling. I really don't like the decals, the way that they're like one big block of decals, and I don't know, I might pull the decals off eventually. You do have full doors, which is nice, and they open like a regular car door, which I prefer because they open up on the highway, they close themselves, they don't swing themselves open. Your airbox, so this is where the airbox splits. So people always talk about installing an airbox spacer, it goes in there. This is some evap stuff in here. You got an evap canister and all those lines. This is a cover, but behind here is your oil tank. We saw that from the top. You got your lines everywhere, right? Going through your coolers here, thermostat housing. There's a drain point for coolant. Really nice engine, very nice layouts, very clean, very pretty casting. The engine has the two nice support beams beneath it, so that's pretty protected, but the oil pan is not 100% protected by metal. You have metal back here, but right under the center is just plastic, so I might do a skid plate. There's your muffler, which does have a catalytic converter in it. Yuck, to get rid of that. Here's your rear shock. I just noticed that the spring has been rubbing the crossover ring pretty hard right there, so that's kind of gross looking. But it is, it does have a plastic sleeve that the crossover travels on, so that's pretty cool. It doesn't slide straight on the shock. There's a plastic sleeve under here, so you got a plastic isolator sliding on a plastic sleeve for the top range for the dual rate suspension. Again, fully adjustable back here. But yeah, this is cool. You have a little pinion brake here. That's just your parking brake. It's a dedicated brake, and then on each side of your knuckles, you've got your full rear brakes with your hydraulic brakes going on back here. So that's nice. Aluminum knuckles, pretty big beefy pivot bolts. All that looks good. The suspension's kind of weird. It's not like a Talon. That is really a rigid arm right here, right? It kind of looks like it's got a trailing arm, but the shock hooks to the back of it, and it's really just a one-piece bottom A arm that's really big. So not going to pretend to totally understand this rear suspension yet, but it's been around for a little while, and I can tell you it rides better, and I do prefer it over the Talon so far. The ride and the handling. So 3-cylinder engine, you got your 3 spark plugs there. There's your breather system going into the airbox, so that's good for snorkeling. You don't have to worry about that too much. Big pretty header. Yeah, again, massive sway bar. So if you look up here, you'll see the transmission. That's the clutch housing. That's the output to the rear diff. And then I'm gonna turn the phone so you can see the output from the engine. So it does have U-joints that come off the engine, connecting the engine to the transmission. So it's a totally divorced setup. It's a pretty serious car. I say that because most of the engine is in front of the front wheels, and then the transmission's all the way up there. So it's got a good weight distribution. It's got a better weight distribution than the Talon, at least from how it feels. So that's nice. Engine's pretty centrally located. Now that transmission is a pain in the butt to get to when you have to do a clutch or you want to change the gearing in it or what have you. So that's one downside is you got to pull a lot of stuff to get to that transmission. So here's your airbox up here. That's the thing I was talking about, that center part. You turn and it airbox kind of slides out of there. Drain on it. Yeah, so all that's pretty cool. The frame's really nice back here. I did see a few spots where the welds aren't real pretty and they kind of like skipped a weld here. I mean, that weld's not touching the top pipe in a lot of it, so that's kind of gross. This is where you'd put your cooler. 4 nice metal tie downs. Definitely can only put a smaller cooler on the YXZ, but it's a pure sport side-by-side, so no complaints there. Anything else I've noticed on it? Wheels, so if you look at the offset's really similar front and back. It might be exactly similar. That's different than the Talon, right? The Talon has a deep dish wheel in the back. And I don't like that on the Talon because it seems like it's wasting travel. The axle could be longer, right? Sure, there's had a reason for doing that, but this axle goes way deep into the wheel, which is good in my opinion. So that's nice. Best thing about this is there's no belt. So no belt cooling to worry about, no belt snorkeling. So it simplifies the process for waterproofing. And that's why I went with this over the next 3, was because there's no belt. So what the heck is this thing? It's like a metal bracket that just kind of sits in here and Looks like it just rattles around. It's held in this piece of plastic. Doesn't look like it does anything with the cover. I have no idea what that is or why that's there. I'm probably going to remove it. It's just one more thing to rattle.